Freud discovered a female instinct so powerful and destabilizing that he buried it in his private notes, never publishing it openly. This instinct explains every confusing female behavior you've ever encountered. Why women say one thing but do another, why logic fails with them, why they seem to operate from a completely different psychological framework. Today I'm revealing what Freud tried to hide and why understanding this forbidden instinct will transform every interaction you have with women. This knowledge is dangerous because it works. Here's what Freud discovered that he never dared publish openly. Women possess a fundamental instinct to test and challenge male authority not out of rebellion, but as a biological drive to identify which men are strong enough to be trusted with their vulnerability. This discovery was so threatening to social order that Freud buried it in private correspondence, knowing it would shatter every assumption about female behavior. In 1895, while analyzing his female patients, Freud noticed a pattern that disturbed him deeply. Women who appeared cooperative and submissive in public consistently demonstrated an unconscious compulsion to probe, test, and challenge the men in their lives through seemingly irrational behavior. This wasn't conscious manipulation. It was an automatic psychological process as involuntary as breathing. Freud realized that what men interpreted as female irrationality was actually a sophisticated psychological testing mechanism. Women's seemingly contradictory behavior, their emotional reactions that appeared disproportionate, their tendency to create conflict even in harmonious situations. All of this served a deeper biological purpose that most men completely misunderstood. The dangerous discovery was this: women are biologically programmed to destabilize men who lack genuine strength and to submit only to those who remain unshakable under pressure. This testing instinct operates beneath conscious awareness, meaning women themselves don't realize they're doing it. They experience it as emotions, intuitions, and spontaneous reactions, never recognizing the deeper biological imperative driving their behavior. Freud documented case after case where women unconsciously sabotaged relationships with weak men while becoming deeply devoted to those who passed their instinctual tests. The women couldn't explain their own behavior logically because the testing mechanism operates from the primitive brain, not the rational mind. They would create drama, pick fights, or become emotional precisely to see how men would respond under pressure. Here's why this discovery was so dangerous. It revealed that female behavior follows biological imperatives rather than social conditioning. In an era when society insisted that women were purely products of their environment, Freud had uncovered evidence of deep-seated instincts that couldn't be socialized away. This threatened the entire framework of how relationships and social structures were understood. The testing instinct manifests in countless ways that confuse men daily. A woman agrees to plans, then changes her mind repeatedly, not because she's indecisive, but because she's unconsciously testing whether you'll maintain your position or collapse under pressure. She creates emotional situations that seem unreasonable because she's probing to see if you'll remain centered or become reactive and defensive. Freud recognized that this instinct served crucial evolutionary purposes. Women who could identify psychologically strong men were more likely to choose partners capable of protecting and providing during vulnerable periods like pregnancy and child-rearing. The testing mechanism helped ensure survival by filtering out men who appeared strong superficially, but cracked under genuine pressure. What made this discovery particularly dangerous was its implications for male behavior. Men who understood this instinct could respond strategically rather than reactively, maintaining composure during tests, and thus earning genuine female respect and devotion. Men who didn't understand it would fail the tests repeatedly, creating cycles of conflict and dissatisfaction that destroyed relationships. Freud realized he had uncovered the key to understanding every mysterious aspect of female psychology that had puzzled men throughout history. But publishing this openly would have created social chaos, as it challenged every romantic ideal and social convention about male-female relationships. Instead, he hinted at it obliquely in his published works while keeping the full implications private. The testing instinct explains why women often seem most attracted to men who appear least desperate for their approval. It reveals why emotional reactions that seem completely illogical to men serve perfectly logical biological purposes for women. It shows why traditional advice about treating women well often backfires, because kindness without strength signals weakness to the unconscious testing mechanism. Here's the instinct that terrifies modern society. Women unconsciously probe every man they encounter to determine his psychological hierarchy position, and they're biologically programmed to feel attraction only toward those who demonstrate unshakable dominance during these tests. Society fears this truth because it destroys the egalitarian fantasy and reveals that female attraction operates on primitive power dynamics, not romantic ideals. This testing instinct manifests through what Freud called unconscious provocation patterns. A woman will unconsciously create situations designed to pressure test your psychological strength. She'll disagree with obvious facts to see if you'll maintain your position or collapse into people-pleasing. She'll create emotional chaos to observe whether you remain centered or become reactive and defensive. Watch this pattern in your own experience. A woman agrees to meet you at a specific time, then texts that she's running late, not once, but repeatedly throughout the interaction. This isn't poor time management. It's an unconscious test of whether you'll maintain your standards or accommodate her inconsistency. Your response determines whether she perceives you as dominant or submissive. The instinct operates through emotional amplification designed to bypass male logic. Women create situations where reasoning fails, and only authentic strength of character can navigate successfully. They'll escalate minor disagreements into major conflicts, not because they care about the surface issue, but because conflict reveals character under pressure. Modern society desperately suppresses this knowledge because it reveals uncomfortable truths about female nature. The politically correct narrative insists that women want equality, respect, and partnership. The biological reality is that women's attraction mechanisms respond to displays of benevolent dominance and psychological superiority, regardless of their conscious political beliefs. Here's what makes this particularly threatening to social order. Women can't control this instinct any more than men can control sexual attraction to physical beauty. It operates automatically, beneath conscious awareness, creating attraction patterns that contradict everything women have been taught they should want. This creates massive cognitive dissonance in modern relationships. The testing behaviors appear in countless forms that most men misinterpret completely. She'll contradict statements you just made, forcing you to choose between maintaining your position or avoiding conflict. She'll create last-minute changes to established plans, testing whether you'll hold your boundaries or bend to accommodate her chaos. She'll express emotions that seem completely disproportionate to the situation, probing to see if you'll remain logical or get pulled into her emotional state. Freud documented that women who successfully identified psychologically dominant men would become remarkably cooperative and feminine, while those same women would become increasingly difficult and combative with men who failed their tests. The same woman could appear sweet and supportive or demanding and unreasonable, depending entirely on whether the man demonstrated authentic strength during her unconscious evaluations. Society fears this knowledge because it reveals that sexual attraction isn't negotiable or fair. It's biological and hierarchical. Women don't choose to be attracted to psychologically dominant men any more than men choose to be attracted to physical beauty. These patterns exist regardless of education, career success, or social conditioning. The most dangerous aspect of this instinct is its accuracy. Women's testing mechanisms are remarkably effective at identifying genuine strength versus performed confidence. A man can fake dominance temporarily, but the unconscious probing will eventually reveal his true psychological position. This is why relationships often deteriorate over time. The woman's biology eventually identifies weakness that was initially hidden. Understanding this instinct explains every confusing aspect of modern dating and relationships. It reveals why women often seem most attracted to men who appear least interested in pleasing them. It shows why traditional nice guy behavior consistently fails to generate attraction. It demonstrates why women create conflict even in seemingly good relationships. They are unconsciously testing whether their partner's strength is genuine or just surface performance. Here's the psychological blind spot that keeps this instinct hidden. Women genuinely don't understand their own testing behavior because it operates from the unconscious mind, not rational thought. They experience the testing as spontaneous emotions, sudden mood changes, and inexplicable dissatisfaction, never recognizing that their biology is systematically evaluating male psychological strength through these seemingly random behaviors. Freud discovered that when he pointed out these testing patterns to his female patients, they reacted with genuine confusion and often outright denial. The women insisted they weren't testing anyone, they were simply expressing how they felt in the moment. This wasn't conscious deception. They literally couldn't perceive their own unconscious programming because it operated beneath the level of self-awareness. The instinct disguises itself as authentic emotional responses. When a woman suddenly becomes upset about something trivial, she genuinely feels upset. She's not pretending. What she doesn't realize is that her unconscious mind selected that particular trigger as a test mechanism. Her emotional system activated around an issue that would reveal whether her partner remains centered under pressure or becomes reactive and desperate to fix her feelings. This creates a devastating cycle in relationships. The woman unconsciously tests. The man fails by becoming defensive or accommodating. She loses attraction and respect. Then she genuinely believes the relationship problems are caused by incompatibility or his inadequacy. She never connects her loss of attraction to his failure of her unconscious tests because the testing mechanism remains invisible to her conscious mind. Modern women have additional layers of psychological protection around this instinct. They've been educated to believe that attraction should be based on equality, shared interests, and emotional connection. When they find themselves losing attraction to genuinely nice, caring men while feeling drawn to those who seem psychologically dominant, they experience massive cognitive dissonance that forces the instinct even deeper underground. The hiding mechanism works through rationalization and projection. When a woman loses interest in a man who failed her tests, she'll create logical explanations that have nothing to do with the real cause. We just weren't compatible, or he wasn't ambitious enough, or I need someone more emotionally available. These explanations feel completely true to her because her conscious mind never perceived the testing that actually determined the outcome. Here's what makes this particularly complex. Women often hate themselves for being attracted to men who pass their tests, especially if those men seem less suitable on paper than the nice guys they rejected. They'll fight against their own attraction, trying to force themselves to want the men who treated them well, never understanding that kindness without strength triggers biological rejection mechanisms. The instinct also hides behind cultural conditioning about what women are supposed to want. Society tells women they should value sensitivity, emotional availability, and partnership equality. When their biology responds positively to psychological dominance and negatively to accommodation, they interpret this as personal failure rather than natural programming. This creates shame around their authentic attraction patterns. Women develop elaborate psychological defenses to avoid confronting this instinct. They'll blame relationship failures on external circumstances, timing, or the man's specific flaws rather than acknowledging that they lost attraction when he demonstrated psychological weakness. They'll convince themselves that their sudden mood changes and conflict creation are justified responses to his behavior, rather than unconscious testing mechanisms. The hiding becomes self-reinforcing because admitting the testing instinct would require acknowledging that their attraction operates on primitive dominance hierarchies rather than enlightened equality. This threatens their self-image as rational, evolved beings who make relationship choices based on compatibility and shared values rather than biological programming. Even when women notice patterns in their own behavior, always losing interest in accommodating men, feeling most attracted during conflict or challenge, they rationalize these patterns in ways that preserve their conscious self-concept. They'll decide they're attracted to confidence or passion, rather than recognizing they're responding to displays of psychological dominance during unconscious testing scenarios. This psychological blindness serves an important function. It keeps the testing mechanism pure and uncontaminated by conscious manipulation. If women were aware they were testing, they might consciously create fake tests or suppress genuine ones, which would compromise the instinct's ability to accurately assess male psychological strength. Here's how this hidden instinct turns strong men into dancing puppets. Once a woman's unconscious testing begins, most men instinctively try to fix her emotional states, prove their worthiness, or avoid conflict. Exactly the responses that signal psychological weakness and trigger deeper, more intense testing. The instinct controls men by exploiting their natural desire to make women happy, turning masculine protectiveness into a weapon against masculine authority. The control mechanism works through emotional bait that seems completely reasonable on the surface. She expresses dissatisfaction with something minor, and your instinct tells you to address her concern, explain your position, or find a compromise. What you don't realize is that her unconscious mind created that dissatisfaction specifically to observe your response. The moment you become reactive to her emotional state, you've failed the test and demonstrated that she controls your psychological equilibrium. Watch how this plays out in typical scenarios. She mentions being upset about something at work, and you immediately try to solve her problem or make her feel better. Her unconscious registers that you became activated by her emotional distress, which signals that she has psychological power over you. This triggers loss of attraction and respect, even though she consciously appreciates your caring response. The testing escalates when men fail the initial probes. If accommodation and people-pleasing responses don't reveal authentic strength, her unconscious will amplify the pressure. Minor complaints become major conflicts. Reasonable requests become impossible demands. Occasional mood changes become frequent emotional chaos. Each escalation is designed to find the breaking point where your genuine character emerges from beneath your performed niceness. Freud observed that men caught in this cycle become increasingly desperate and accommodating, which only intensifies the woman's unconscious need to find their authentic strength. They start walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring her mood and sacrificing their own preferences to avoid triggering her dissatisfaction. This behavior signals complete psychological submission, which destroys any possibility of genuine attraction or respect. The control operates through intermittent reinforcement that keeps men psychologically hooked. After intense testing and conflict, she'll suddenly become warm, affectionate, and appreciative. This brief return to harmony feels so relieving after the chaos that men interpret it as evidence they're making progress. They don't realize that the temporary peace came because her unconscious detected a moment of authentic strength, and the cycle will repeat until she's thoroughly mapped their psychological limits. Here's the most insidious aspect. The instinct turns men's strengths against them. Your desire to be a good partner becomes the mechanism of your control. Your willingness to compromise gets weaponized into endless accommodation. Your emotional investment becomes leverage for manipulation. The better man you try to be according to conscious social values, the weaker you appear to her unconscious biological programming. The control extends beyond individual interactions into entire relationship dynamics. Men start modifying their behavior, interests, and even friendships based on their partner's reactions, never realizing they're responding to unconscious tests rather than genuine preferences. They become smaller versions of themselves, believing they're being considerate when they're actually demonstrating that she has authority over their choices and priorities. Modern dating amplifies this control mechanism exponentially. Dating apps and social media give women constant validation and options, which intensifies their unconscious testing, because they can afford to reject men who fail their biological evaluations. Men competing in this environment become increasingly accommodating and desperate, which guaranteously triggers the rejection mechanisms they're trying to avoid. The most tragic aspect is that men who fall under this control often become the very thing women find most unattractive: needy, reactive, and psychologically dependent. They start seeking her approval for basic decisions, constantly checking her emotional temperature, and losing the independent masculine identity that initially attracted her. The testing instinct gradually transforms confident men into insecure partners who require constant reassurance. Understanding this control mechanism reveals why traditional relationship advice fails so catastrophically. Communication, compromise, and consideration are precisely the responses that signal psychological weakness to the unconscious testing system. Men following this advice become more controlled, not less, because they're feeding the very behaviors that trigger intensified testing. The control becomes self-reinforcing because men who don't understand what's happening interpret relationship problems as evidence they need to try harder, be more understanding, or make more accommodations. Each escalation of their efforts signals deeper weakness to her unconscious, creating cycles of testing and accommodation that inevitably end in loss of attraction and relationship failure. Here's how to break free from unconscious female testing and gain genuine respect. You must remain psychologically unmoved by emotional provocations while maintaining caring detachment. When you stop reacting to tests as genuine problems requiring your solution. The testing mechanism recognizes authentic strength and shifts from evaluation to attraction mode. The strategic response begins with recognizing tests rather than getting pulled into their emotional content. When she becomes upset about something minor, instead of rushing to fix her feelings, you acknowledge without becoming activated. I can see you're upset rather than, what can I do to make you feel better? Freud's suppressed insight was that women's unconscious minds constantly scan for men who remain centered during emotional storms. The moment you demonstrate that her emotional state doesn't destabilize you, her biology recognizes psychological superiority and shifts to respect mode. This isn't being cold. It's maintaining emotional independence while staying present. The key is responding to the woman, not reacting to the test. You can be loving and attentive while refusing control by emotional fluctuations. When she creates conflict, address it calmly without defensiveness. When she expresses dissatisfaction, listen without immediately accommodating. This demonstrates the unshakable strength her instinct seeks. Strategic implementation creates immediate behavioral changes most men never experience. When you remain unmoved by provocation, she unconsciously recognizes dominance, and testing decreases dramatically. She becomes more cooperative and feminine, because her biology identified someone worth following. The most powerful response is maintaining your priorities regardless of her reactions. Keep your plans even if she expresses dissatisfaction. Hold boundaries even through emotional pressure. This signals internal strength rather than external validation dependency. Exactly what the testing seeks to identify. When you stop failing unconscious tests, she stops creating them. The conflict and drama that seemed natural suddenly disappear because they were never about surface issues. They were psychological evaluation. Once strength is confirmed, her instinct shifts from testing to trusting. If this forbidden knowledge about female psychology has revealed why your relationships have been confusing, take action now. Comment below and tell me which insight changed your understanding most. Learning that women unconsciously test male strength. Understanding why they don't realize they're doing it. Recognizing how tests control male behavior. Or discovering strategic responses for genuine respect. Share your biggest realization because I want to know which truth will transform your interactions with women. Hit that like button if you're ready to stop failing unconscious tests and start passing them naturally. Subscribe with notifications on, because I regularly share these suppressed psychological insights that most men never discover. Remember, female attraction responds to psychological strength, not conscious effort. Use this knowledge wisely.